Yeah.
Okay. Press the button. All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay, but for anyone watching after the fact, you don't even know there was a delay, so who cares? I'm Elon. This is Brian. What's up?
Cool. That's a cool way to say hello.
You think that was
Hi. Hi,
sarcasm?
everybody.
I thought it was okay.
I
Sometimes I say
liked
hello
it.
like that.
It was
My
great.
coworkers. Hey guys, what's up? What's up? I don't know. Maybe I don't say it exactly like that. I'm trying to bring some different energy, for a live show. Just trying to be like.
I appreciate that. Sorry, my energy is not like all the way there yet, but it will be.
Okay. Just bring what you have. Just give us your best. You're the robot, right? It's like you're like Data, and I'll be like, whoa, and like to get makes our fun dynamic. Okay, so we have a thing that we're gonna record first, then we're gonna start. Okay, so Brian, you can take it away whenever you want.
Yeah, sorry. Give me a sec.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, how's everyone doing? Thanks for joining us. Adam, Chris, Schwab Squad, aka Matthew, Joe. Matt and Joe have been here from the start, chatting with me, talking to some puck doku. I feel like it's always like as soon as I'm finished, then I think of all the players that I should have thought of. Like Paul Stastny, obviously, like someone who's on the Jets and Colorado. Paul Stastny, easy. I don't even think of it. I don't know. It's hard for me. I guess Teemu Selanne, and it didn't count. It was wrong because he was on the other version of the Jets, like the Phoenix Coyotes version. What are you gonna do? Shams is here. Adam, sup? Did I ever say Adam? This is more of Brian's thing to just name the people as he sees them write things in the chat.
Isn't it great? Isn't it fun?
Man, my bedtime is like
I know
45 minutes.
You're an old man. Are you gonna survive?
I don't know. It depends when we start. Yeah, okay. I don't know. I think I could go till like 10:30.
We're all doing the best we can here. Yeah. I promise. I'm not holding anything back.
I'm looking at the 2015 draft because we're going to talk about the Bruins and how Pavel Zacha might be their top line center.
Yeah.
He was taken 6th overall. There were some really good players taken in that draft after him.
I can't wait
so
to
many
hear
good players
about them.
Well, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the chat while you finish up with your prep.
Okay.
Or was that a sign that you're ready?
No, I'm ready.
Oh, okay, cool. I'll talk about that draft later. Who cares about that draft? Kaprizov was taken in that draft really late by Michkov situation. Okay.
Okay. So are we going to do it like in pre-roll? Is that you down with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. By the way, sorry. I've been finishing prepping something and I am happy to be here as much as I might not have communicated that otherwise. We're recording a little message before the show. So I'm going to do that first and then we'll start the show for anyone watching and confused. Yeah, I hope. Anyway, okay. Hi, everyone. Before we get started today, we actually have some sad news to share, and that's that we recently learned of the passing of Alex Claremont, who had been a longtime listener and supporter of the show and had a big presence in our Keeping Karlsson community, especially in the earlier days. He joined what was then our Facebook group back in 2017. And since then, he played like some really big roles, including being active in those early days, which was always great, and like having a presence and setting the tone for what the community could be. He had a big hand in that, but he also like helped run the patron rankings for a few days back in 2018 and stepped up and helped us there. He also gave us some guidance when we were moving from Facebook to Discord. Elon, it was actually like, I'm not sure if you remember, but you listen more to me when I have somebody else saying the same thing I want, if someone else is saying it. And Alex's support for Discord was one of the reasons that I think I might have been able to convince you to move over off of Facebook and over to Discord. And he helped us structure and build our server. And, you know, I know like whenever I saw an Alex post in our group, I knew it'd be interesting and insightful and positive, open, funny, inviting and engaging. He was also like an advocate for equity and wasn't afraid to like speak up for people and say the right thing if the wrong thing had been said and make things safer and more welcoming for all. He was like basically exactly the kind of person that we love to have in our community. And we were really fortunate to have him as a listener and supporter. So in his honor, we're going to be making a donation to the Canadian Mental Health Association, the York Region branch at the request of his family. And we'll include a link in the show notes and in our Discord server for anyone who would like to join us in doing that. And I guess while I'm here, if you or anyone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, cmha.ca is a great resource. If you're in Canada, you can call 1-833-456-4566 or text 45645 to get support. And in the US, I'm actually going with, no, sorry. And in the US, you can head over to mhanational.org. And they have some resources that they can point you to as well. You can call or text 988, or you can also call 1-800-985-5990. Okay, that's it.
All right. Yeah.
And you can just run the pre-roll and
run the song now.
Run the song. Yeah.
Alex was awesome. Like, was also, I know it's like minor compared, but he gave like good advice to people when they asked like, you know, fantasy advice questions. Like he was always engaged. It was great. I'll miss
good
it.
Advice. Okay. Insightful. Yeah.
All right. So with that, the Keeping Karlsson song plays. Then here I go. Yeah! Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who you may as well call yellow, because we're going to be talking some green and red tonight. I am your host, Elon Dubrovsky, and with me to cover some news and then talk about the green boys and red boys of last season, it's the fantasy hockey robot, my very good friend, Brian Com. Brian, happy to have you here. I was about to say, how are you? I know you don't like that, but hello.
Hello. Hey, Elon. How's it going? It's great to be with you again. This is
how dare you?
What?
You asked me, how's it going?
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, you seem very ready to answer the question. And you know what? Earlier today, I was planning, I should have written it down. I had an answer to how's it going, but this is not interesting. What is interesting, actually, you know what we're going to do today? It's going to be fun. This is going to be like, well, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but I have like, I think what are some vintage deep dives on players that we're going to do today, like looking back at the season that was to try and project for the season that will be. Through the season, we try and get as deep as is worth getting and as we can and as is relevant. But the off season really gives us like this pause, this moment where you can really go in. And I have to say, when I was prepping for the show today, I was getting some like earlier Keeping Karlsson vibes from the sort of work I was doing. Like it reminded me of the Almanac Day. So I'm excited to bring that and share that all with you. And I hope everyone enjoys.
Oh boy. Okay. So I need to bring some vintage Elon, whatever that means, but sounds like we got to strap in for a long one. So I guess I won't wait too much longer, except to mention, of course, Keeping Karlsson proudly presented by DobberHockey.com. We're recording this on Wednesday, July 26th. The Dobber Guide dropped today. So, the world famous guide you got all the projections. It like updates itself every time they, have new things that happened. So, you buy it once, then you can keep re-downloading it. So it's really great. Check it out at dobberhockey.com. Also, I will just mention at the start, like our patron community is popping, like more patrons are coming in, signing up for the cupful, which is always very exciting to see our registration numbers go up. It's going to be a wild year. Kevin, Brian, and myself have really been working hard to, get everything going for that. Also, we've been doing mock drafts every day. Like another, we like post in the channel being like, okay, if people sign up for the next mock draft, then it's like by the end of the day, it's like, Elon, come on, set up the draft. We got 14. And so, yeah, those are humming along, and you could come and hang out. We still have our $1 promotion going for another month, right? So come hang out for just $1 for August. See if you like it, and we'd love to have you in our community. But okay, that's keepingkarlsson.com/patron. But with that, Brian, So the plan for today, we got some news, right? We already did 2 episodes. The 2 previous episodes we did together was covering just like kind of all the big free agent signings and trades and like breaking down the impacts of those. And we didn't get to everything. So we're going to finish that off for the first half of today's show. And then for the second half of the show, I've made my classic red boys, green boys spreadsheet, which is basically I split all the players into their first halves and their second halves of the season. And then I have a column here where I did a diff of their point pace in the first half versus their pace in the second half. And then I used a conditional formatting so that the players who did better in the second half are green and the players who did worse in the second half are red. And so we got some really interesting players who did very differently in the first half versus the second half. And we could try to dive in and see like which is the real version. Or usually Brian just says like in the middle, their actual final pace is the real version.
Usually,
but
will I this time?
We'll
and also
see.
shout out to Ben Burnett, former Short Shifts host, who helped coin the phrase "red boys, green boys." Right? we can't say the word with at least tipping our hats to him.
Yeah, either he coined that phrase or he just like in general coined all the phrases of something boys, and then I probably ran with that. But yeah, hope Ben is doing well if you're listening, Ben. But okay, Brian. So yeah, we're gonna start with some news, okay? And I guess the biggest news actually just happened yesterday. Patrice Bergeron announced his retirement. What a career. People are already talking about, are they going to rename the Selkie, the Bergeron, after this amazing career he's had and winning that award so many times? Yeah, he goes out on top. And, we could probably spend a lot of time. I don't know how interesting it would be just talking about his amazing career. But obviously, we want to look at the fancy impact for next year. And, the Bruins didn't only lose Bergeron now going into next year. They also traded Taylor Hall. Don't forget, David Krejci probably isn't coming back. We haven't seen anything to the contrary. Like as far as who they've brought in, they signed JVR, they signed Geeky, Morgan Geeky, they signed Shattenkirk, Lucic, not really like big game breakers. I know JVR used to be. Well, actually, a lot of these guys used to be Lucic and Shattenkirk, if this was like a 6 years ago podcast. But yeah, looking at the depth chart now, like even just at center, if Bergeron and Krejci aren't coming back, we know for sure Bergeron, probably Krejci. Does that make Pavel Zacha the number one center going to next year? I guess him or like Charlie Coyle. So there could be some fantasy value there. I'd be a little worried about some Bruins. Like maybe you could also go along the lines of like, oh, is this bad for like a Marchand or a Pasternak not having like the best centers to play with? Though Pasternak did fine playing with Zacha last year. But yeah, Zacha had a career year last year, right? 57 points, 21 goals, finally doing something to justify that 6th overall pick in 2015. And if you look at that draft, there were some really good players New Jersey could have taken afterwards. But who knows, maybe this next season, Zacha's still pretty young. He's only 26 years old right now. Maybe the breakout is coming now that he'll potentially get this like top line role with like a Marchand and or Pasta. So what do you think for next year? Are you going to be drafting Pavel Zacha, hoping he can make something of this?
Well, first thing, I don't want to just like skate right past Patrice Bergeron. I'm sorry. Like, I know we're eager to get going, and so am I. But this is like one of the best players ever retiring. So like at least just taking a moment to recognize like the greatness that he was. And remember, like he started his career for fantasy purposes, like a 60-point player, but still like a really effective defensive centerman. And he actually spent like the next 5 years being like, oh, okay, maybe he'll be like a 65-point player. And then basically 10 years into his career, he breaks out with 70 points, little step back to 56-point pace, then back to 80-point pace, 100, 75, 73, 73, 61-point pace. Like this is a reverse career trajectory that Patrice Bergeron had. He peaked in his 5th last season instead of his 5th season. And it's a really crazy way for a career to have gone. But this was like a unique player. And one, I'm going to read a tweet, as boring as that might be for folks. But if you haven't seen it, like it blew my mind. This is from J Fresh Hockey, from 2011 to 2012, all the way to present. So 12 seasons, there were almost 2,000 Selke Trophy ballots submitted. 92% of them, so about 1,800, included Patrice Bergeron, and 1,000 of them, about 48%, had Bergeron in first place. Like this is the hands down, no doubt, top defensive forward in the league of the decade. And then on top of that, he's putting up 70, 80-point seasons. So just a moment to at least recognize the greatness that has been Patrice Bergeron. I sort of joked in our Discord server that like he's just retiring till January, right? Although I feel like he's a guy, like when he says he's done, he's done. Like if he was going to come back in January, I feel like we'd know that. Anyway, so way to go, Patrice Bergeron. And back to Pavel Zacha, Elon, you mentioned that there were like lots of good guys taken after him. I don't think you named any. So for anyone wondering, Werenski, Timo Meyer. So Zacha was taken at 6, then Provorov at 7, whatever. Then 8, 9, 10 were Werenski, Timo Meyer, and Mikko Rantanen. And then, of course, at 13, 14, 15, it was the famous like Bruins. They did not take Connor, Barzal, and Shillington. They took Zboril, DeBrusk, and Sinishin. But then Barzal, Connor, Shabbat went. It was it was a great first round. And New Jersey whiffed, but so did Carolina at 5 ahead of them with Noah Hannafin. Dylan Strome taken 3rd by Arizona. So a weird draft overall, but this isn't what we're doing right
shade
now.
At Noah Hannafin. He's a good player. He's a
top
pairing defenseman.
Okay, that's fair. And those don't grow on trees. So I will give you that. I don't know that he would fit the bill for what you'd be looking at drafting a defenseman 5th overall.
Tell that to the Habs and their draft pick in this most recent draft.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyways, that's a whole separate conversation.
The whole separate conversation. But basically we're looking to see if there's anything to Zacha. And in New Jersey, I was like waiting for Zacha to get his opportunity for a long time. Like I was like, that 6th overall pick to me held some weight. And I was like, oh yeah, like he just needs opportunity. He didn't get it for a long time. And he never really did in New Jersey until he moved on. But we did see moments where Zacha got like a glimpse of an opportunity and then quickly lost it. So, part of that could be, well, he never got the opportunity. Part of that is like, well, he couldn't earn the opportunity or hold the opportunity. And so now in Boston, he's got a chance to finally be the guy coming off basically the best season of his career, 57 points in 82 games. He had a 57-point pace a couple seasons back, over 50 games. But that's basically what we're looking at Zacha to be able to repeat. And he did that, by the way. It's worth noting, with just 8 power play points and second power play deployment. So I guess question number 1 is, can Zacha get on the top power play unit? And one answer to that is like, yeah, like how could he not? I'm going to quote another tweet here. This is from Mika Blake McCurdy at Ineffective Math, who says, now that there's no Bergeron, no Krejci, no Bertuzzi, no Hall, no Nosek, no Foligno, that means half of the dozen most important forwards by minutes per game when dressed are gone from Boston. So like this is it's like a blown wide open depth chart situation. Like, of course you have Marchand, you have Pasternak, you have DeBrusk, and beyond that, are there really any locks? I don't think so. So
no,
Zacha,
I'd say like there's Zacha, and then I don't know, maybe like JVR, who they signed. He's been on the power play before, but
yes, that's a great way to describe JVR. He's been on the power play before. That's as far as I'm willing to go for him. I think, not to jump ahead of Zacha, like JVR will do his thing. He'll have like some random stretches that get really exciting and he'll take shots, and then suddenly he won't anymore. But Zacha has room to grow on the power play by getting that deployment. It seems like there's a step. One reason that Zacha had such a great season last year was because he shot 16% at 5-on-5. That was his best shooting of his career. He historically not a great shooter. I would say I wouldn't expect him to really convert on more than 10% of his chances. Also, while Zacha was on the ice, he had a 12% on ice shooting percentage. So not just him, it wasn't only him who was having success converting shots into goals. It was his whole roster and line. It was his whole line. So I would say that's all reason to maybe knock Zacha down a little bit at 5-on-5. Maybe I'll put him at like a 50-point pace, but his line mates are going to be greatly improved. Like if he plays with Marchand and Pasternak and gets on the top power play, there's room for growth here. It's going to be really interesting. Like Elon, I'm sort of undecided. Like this is age 26 season he's going into. I'm not sure where I'm ready to draft him. Like you could draft him. Like I feel like if I'm drafting, I might look at him as like a 60-point guy with upside for more, like 70, maybe 75. If like that 6th overall pick that we saw so much promise in is still there. He's still young, right? He's been around a while, but he's still young. This is just his age 26 season for Zacha. So I have hope. I have faith. Line 1, power play 1, even if that variance regresses, he's going to have some really great folks around him. So I think he stands to benefit the most from Bergeron leaving. And then there's the rest of the roster, right? Are you ready to dig in, or where are you drafting Zaka? Are you drafting Zaka?
I feel like he's worth drafting for sure. I think I'm kind of with you. Like, draft him as a 60-point guy. If someone wants to reach for him, expecting like a lot more than that, I feel like let them take that risk and I'll take a more sure thing. But yeah, once we're getting to later in the draft and, someone who we're expecting to get around 55, 60 is going, like, might as well take a guy who has the upside because he has a chance to be the top line center. Like, it's not only that he's going to have good line mates, he might like play more ice time. Like, Boston's going to have to, field a team. I will throw another player at you though, Brian, when we were talking about all these like, like who else is going to challenge. I saw a tweet so they signed this guy, Morgan Geekie, who hasn't really done much right in the NHL. We've barely ever talked about him on the show. I saw a tweet from Connor Ryan for whatever it's worth. Since you're quoting tweets, I'll quote tweets. And by the way, I guess we're making a deal here. We're still going to call them tweets.
We're calling them tweets.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, this is a tangent, and I'm sorry for doing it, but you know how like with the rebrand, I was thinking like, okay, like what if we rebranded? Like what would we be called? And what
would be the worst possible rebrand we can do?
Well, like that's how the thought started, but then I stumbled across we could have called the Cupful Puckful.
Okay, what would that stand for?
Patron ultimate patrons of maybe no you. Maybe it would be like Puckful or Puckful, but patrons of Keeping Karlsson Fantasy League.
Yeah,
Puckful. But we can't change it now. We're not dummies who change our branding once everybody knows what it is. We're not about to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you're not going to push that idea. But yeah, this tweet from Connor Ryan. Again, I'm talking about Morgan Geekie. So 593 NHL skaters logged 500 plus minutes of 5-on-5 time on ice last season. Morgan Geekie's 2.47 points per 60 ranked 31st in the NHL, ahead of players like Jack Eichel and Alex Ovechkin. And so, yeah, this is like, Brian, this used to be your bread and butter. Like, I remember you used to call some of these guys like the year before they broke out, looking at their points per 60 and be like, if they could only get more minutes, maybe we can have a breakout here. I believe Timo Meier was one of those guys who you were predicting before he broke out. And like, maybe this could be a similar situation. Because again, like we've just said, he's going to a situation in Boston where maybe he will be, have potential to get into the top 6 as a winger. We really only have Marchand, Pasternak, and DeBrusk. And then, like, why can't he beat out JVR or I don't even know who are the other wingers on this team? AJ Greer, Trent Frederick. I mean, like there's a spot. So he's a guy that I don't think I'm going to draft, right? But I'm going to have my eyes on Morgan Geekie. Connor Geekie is actually another guy who was drafted as a high pedigree prospect. I don't know. They're probably related. They're probably brothers. But anyways, Morgan Geekie on the Bruins. Whatever, we don't need to do a deep dive. I'm just like planting my flag here that I'm interested in this guy, and I'm curious to see what kind of deployment he'll get next year. And if it's looking good, he might be someone I would take a flyer on in free agency.
Yeah, you could take a flyer on him. I mean, the one thing he might have going for him in Boston, but it's a big might. He might have a little more if he can hold in the top 6, because in Seattle, there's not really room, at least in the structure that the Kraken had last year, to break out and be a superstar, right? Like we saw like Dylan Sprong do well for a time, and Ryan Donato and Alex, like all these guys had Alex Wenberg was the rest of all these guys had their little runs, as did Geekie, but that's all they could possibly have in that setup. Geekie, former 3rd round 67th overall draft pick of the Carolina Hurricanes. He just turned 25. Happy belated birthday. So this is age 25 season coming up. There's room here for him to grow. Just 180 NHL games under his belt. And Elon, yeah, I am looking like his points per 60. It was fantastic in Seattle last season. One reason for that is because, well, it's hard, right? Like the smaller sample, he played 9.5 minutes a night. Right. So like on one hand, way to go. This is at 5-on-5. So way to go, Morgan Geekie. You made the very most of those 9.5 minutes, but it's almost like someone who barely shoots, right? Like they take 60 shots, like a shot a game, 82 shots, and they score on 1 or 2 more or less than usual. Like that makes that has a big impact on their shooting percentage or like their total. So that's sort of how I see Geekie's points per 60 rates, like promising, but also I'm not so sure. Also, like the guys that I'm most comfortable being like, yeah, like I'm really into seeing what this guy can do. They have high shot rates, high shot attempt rates, and high expected goal rates. Geekies are good. Like they could be top 6 material, but they're not like wowing me. They're not like, someone give this guy a chance. Although I would like to see what happens if he gets a chance, because he has increased his expected goals rates and his shot rates over the last between his first and second seasons in Seattle, which were his first 2 full seasons in the NHL. One other reason why he had a points per 60 rate that was so high, Morgan Geekie had an on-ice shooting percentage that was at 12.5%, which you wouldn't expect from a guy who spent most of his minutes with Dylan Sprong and Brandon Tanev. But again,
Daniel Sprong, by the way.
Oh, down. Yeah, sorry. I always do that. So thanks for correcting me. But again, like, it's a small sample and anything can. So I want to see if Geekie can get like 13, 14 minutes a night. We'll have a better sense of what he might like. We'll at least know. Right now, I don't feel like we have enough data to really weigh in, except for the fact that there seems to be some promise there. Like, I'm not ruling him out from being relevant. I guess his biggest obstacle in Boston is finding a place to be relevant on that roster, because as much turnover as there's been, I don't think it's inconceivable that Geekie finds himself on the third line. Of course, also depending on whether he's playing center or on the wing. Between Marchand, Zacha Pasternak, JVR, Coyle, DeBrusque, like there's a top 6 right there.
Yeah.
So Morgan Geekie can knock off Van Riemsdyk or Coyle. Like, that's not a huge mountain to climb, but also he doesn't have to.
Yeah, for sure. Like, again, he's not someone that I'm saying is like a sure thing. I just wanted to throw him out there as like an interesting lower end guy to watch. I think I know why you're calling Daniel Sprong Dylan Sprong. It's because I think you were thinking of Dylan Strome, who was another guy drafted in 2015.
There you go.
So you probably were looking at that draft and you got all discombobulated there, but that's okay. That's why we're a good team. So let's go to Carolina, who made some news recently. They signed Anthony DeAngelo. They signed Anthony DeAngelo after trying to trade for him. And then, they were going to have to give a prospect or something, and Philly was going to cover maybe half the salary, which would have still made them pay like 2.5 mil. Lucky for them, the trade got canceled by the league. And then Philly ended up deciding to buy out DeAngelo. Now Carolina gets him at a nice discount there. 1 year, 1.675. So I'm sure they're happy about how that all played out. And as far as DeAngelo goes, I'd imagine that he is happy as well, because the last time he had a successful season was when he was on the Carolina Hurricanes. Of course, it was a slightly different situation, just because when he was on Carolina the last time, he was like on the top power play. So he was really able to feast, and he ended up getting 51 points in 64 games, a 65-point pace. It was an amazing season for DeAngelo. This is just 2 seasons ago, by the way. This is just in 2021-22. This is not like ancient history, but yeah, he did have 20 power play points in there. Now they have Brent Burns. So I guess my question though is like, is it for sure that like Brent Burns is power play 1 and like DeAngelo is power play 2, and like we don't even need to discuss it much? Or is this the kind of thing where now should we be a little bit like concerned about Burns, because you never know, because DeAngelo did have success in Carolina in that spot before? I'm just curious to get your general take on DeAngelo, where you would draft him, and like if this affects Burns negatively in any way because of a potential power play threat.
This is such a tough one. Like, the comparison I'm trying to draw is in Toronto with Morgan Rielly and John Klingberg. And like, it's not perfect by any means, but you have the guy who's been in the QB role for a while, well, in Burns' case for a year, but it's worked out, right? There's no reason to mess with anything. He was basically locked in there all season long. And along comes Tony DeAngelo, who has been in a QB1 role before, like John Klingberg, and has had success in that role. But it's a little different here because he's had that success in Carolina. But the other analogy I see here is that neither is particularly well regarded for their defensive play. Like, this is a signing where to get something out of it, it seems like the whole point would be like, can you run the power play better than the guy we already have? And maybe you'll be a specialist there. But the thing is that Burns was good there. Burns was, as we talked about on the show last season, Burns was everything DeAngelo was on the power play, and then some at 5-on-5. He actually, I remember we spent one episode talking about how much Burns's numbers on the power play mirrored DeAngelo's. Like, Carolina's like, okay, we want our power play quarterback to do this. And both those guys did it exactly the way Carolina asked, basically the same numbers. So for me, Elon, I don't know who's going to be on the power play quarterbacking, but I do know that between Burns and D'Angelo, they've both dropped in my draft rankings. Like I think I'd still favor Burns, but I wouldn't be too eager to draft him. Although, you know, of course, there's some even strength points to be had from Burns, probably fewer from D'Angelo since he's going to be playing on the bottom pair in all likelihood. And like, I don't know, he's still the candidate to be a healthy scratch at the same time too. So like, the Canes still have Jalen Chatfield, right? Who was a regular, played 78 games last season, and he could hypothetically step in for D'Angelo any given night. So if, of course, the Canes still have the same 7 defensemen going into next season. So that's my take here, Elon, which is that I don't know who's going to run the power play, but I do know that I'm a little less into Brent Burns. Like I'm bumping him down my draft list, and I'd rather not have to, like, I don't want him to be my first D or even my second D, because I want to be able to rely on those guys for power play points all season long. And there's just there's a flag there now in Carolina named Tony DeAngelo.
Yeah, which obviously makes it interesting. You're playing like a game of chicken, right? Because maybe if Burns ends up falling in drafts, and then it is worth taking him at some point, because what if it's kind of like Victor Hedman this year? I feel like Hedman, like, you know, we're worried about him now because Sergachev took the power play last year. But like, imagine if you get Hedman late and then he does just, you know, step back into the role he's been in forever. It's like huge value. Maybe it could be the same with Burns. Yeah, you got to play that game. But yeah, DeAngelo, I don't know. I think he's like interesting now. Like he's probably going to fall super far in drafts, and at some point grab him for the upside and just hope for the best. But yeah, you don't want to waste like a high pick on him, because yeah, like he could get scratched for sure. So we could look now at the other side here of Philly, who waived DeAngelo. We already talked about how they traded Provorov. They also traded Kevin Hayes. So it's kind of like a question, kind of like in Boston, like who's left here? Though they do have a couple forwards that people may have forgotten about that apparently are going to play next year. As far as we know right now, Sean Couturier is planning on coming back. Cam Atkinson planning on coming back. So, you know, that the forward core actually is looking pretty good, because they, you know, they still have Owen Tippett, who, you know, had this breakout a bit last year, Travis Konechny, and you throw in now like Couturier and Atkinson. Joel Farabee is still there. Morgan Frost had a really good season last year. So I'm actually like interested to see how things will go for the forwards on Philly. But yeah, on defense, yeah, we'll see, right? Who, like, I'm looking at their depth chart right now in Cap Friendly. I'm seeing Sanheim, Ristolainen, Cam York. I guess Cam York is probably the front runner for power play time. Mark Stahl is there. Nick Seeler. They traded for Sean Walker. I don't know.
You're just naming guys now,
These
right?
are,
Like
that's their six. That's their six guys.
No, I know. And like, that's it. Like, I love when you're just like, there's nothing to be gained from even uttering these names. I mean,
I have a guy, Zamula, in my dynasty league. I'd like for him to crack the lineup sometimes.
Do you think he will, as someone who's, I hope, has done their homework on him?
I mean, I didn't pay much for him. I think I got him like for free, but I think that, like, just going through those names I said, I think he's like kind of like what you said about Jaden Chatfield. I think that's where Zamula is right now, where it's like, and I'm probably not even saying his name right, Zamula. I don't know, but like, it seems like there's a pretty good chance that he can crack the lineup sometimes. I don't think it's gonna be too hard to, you know, envision Sean Walker or Nick Seeler getting scratched for a game once in a while.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So, I mean, in Philly, one of the guys you've named is a green boy. So I'm going to save most of my analysis on him for when we get to that moment. But just like, if you're, you know, thinking, I like where you're at with Couturier and Atkinson. I think, like, I hope Couturier is healthy. Honestly, even if he is healthy, I'm assuming he's like fragile or 70% healthy or both of those things. So I'm not going to get overly excited about drafting him, but I would probably still look to try him out. Same with Cam Atkinson, although I expect him to be a little healthier. Cam Atkinson's age, Elon, always blows me away. I don't know why. I think he's still, I mean, like, I've told you many times that he's not developing anymore, but like, I'm still shocked. He's 34 years old. Who knew? Yeah. But the
shocking
point being, he's not getting any younger. He's coming off an injury, but we've seen folks do fine with that before. So I think Couturier and Atkinson could still be good gets. Of course, Travis Konechny, if anyone's going to write him off, still a very worthwhile roster in all formats. And then you mentioned like Morgan Frost had a decent year last year. You've got Farabee, you've got Tippett. There's a lot of guys looking to take that step forward. But I guess the one place to focus is on that top power play. And Elon, like, this is also I'm going to throw another analogy at you. And it's like a really like snoozy one. Like I'm wondering if the York Ristolainen situation is going to be like the Kalen Addison, Jared Spurgeon situation from last year, where like Cam York will be like completely fantasy relevant, have the opportunity to push, not succeed, but Rasmus Ristolainen in his place won't be able to do much with it either. And they'll just like, you're always watching, see, oh, is this the moment where Cam York's up there again? And then nothing happens, and like he doesn't shoot a lot either. So that would be my concern, but I wouldn't mind taking like a late flyer on him in case he is quarterbacking the top
why
power
not?
play. I would prefer Tony D'Angelo to Cam York. Like I have a feeling he'll pick up a few more power play points. Oh, I don't know, actually.
I'll
But
take D'Angelo.
yeah, well, I would. Well, that's what I'm saying. I would take D'Angelo, but I paused for a minute because if Cam York is quarterbacking the top power play out of camp and succeeds, he'll do better than D'Angelo.
I mean, it's not only about power play, like, but yeah, maybe like I don't like that Cam York only took, Cam York only took like 0.8 shots per game last year and was playing almost 20 minutes. So that always like turns me off of a player in fantasy. But I guess, you never know. Kind of maybe my analogy would be like when Nick Leddy was running the top power play on the Islanders. And I was like, I don't even still.
And who did you want to replace him, or who was he replacing?
Who was Leddy replacing?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, like I feel like the analogy has to involve like some veteran presence.
Well, no, I'm just saying like I think my analogy is like I'm going into this year thinking like Cam York will probably be on the top power play.
Straight up. Yeah.
But I just don't care either way.
Yeah. I think he's going to be a tough roster. Like you could grab him thinking you're being savvy, like, oh, I might have a power play quarterback here, and it's going to be a pretty decent top power play. But at the same time, there's like zero peripherals coming from the guy. So if he doesn't point on the power play, if he's there, he's likely not helping you a whole lot. It's going to be hard for him to earn spots on rosters from what we've seen from him so far.
Yeah. And you teased it, but Rasmus Ristolainen is kind of interesting. He had a really strong end to last season. We'll talk about him later. But if you're in a bangers league, Ristolainen does give you like the hits and blocks. Like he used to shoot. That's gone away. But maybe now with like more openings in Philly, he could do something. But we'll talk about him a little later. We'll talk about still a bunch of guys a little later. But I think it's time for a break. And then I've got 4 more teams sort of just talk about their news before we get to our green boys here. So we'll get to all that in just a sec. Bye. I don't know. I just remembered how John Newhold said that he doesn't like how I like say it. Get to that in just a sec. Well, whatever. You're listening to Karlsson.
To other podcasts where they go to ad breaks with that, and the ad break doesn't happen. It's okay. I don't think there's anything you can do.
I said last time that I'll just like put a spot for the next one. I'll just like leave a space and try it out. We can try everything. All right, we are back, Brian. And so we still have some teams that we didn't cover that, this is lower end news, so we don't have to like spend too much time. But going to the Ducks, they made a big signing in terms of money. I don't know if it was a big signing in terms of impact. Maybe you can tell me, but Alex Killorn got himself 4 years at $6.25 million. This is a year after Anaheim took a shot on Dylan Strome. Now I'm messing up with mixing people up with Dylan Strome. Ryan Strome, right? They signed him to a big contract after Strome had like a good year playing with Panarin. And last year, Alex Killorn had a good year playing with Stamkos, a career year, right? 65 points for Alex Killorn. And I guess the Ducks have decided, it didn't work so well with Ryan Strome. Maybe actually he was just a product of his line mates, but this time it'll be different. And so now they get Alex Killorn, 33 years old, veteran in the league, and he's going to be making big money for these next 4 years. He's going to be making $6.25 million as a 37-year-old. Not too bad. And I'm curious to ask you, Brian, now, like looking to next year, like Anaheim obviously has so much like in their prospect pool. Like everyone's super excited about what they'll look like in a couple of years from now. But in the meantime, just looking at next year, I guess Killorn will get into for sure he'll at least start in the top 6, I'd imagine, with that contract to be playing with like either a Zegras or a Mason McTavish, Troy Terry. Like he should have some decent line mates. So how interested are you in Alex Killorn? Do you think he has a chance of repeating his 65 points from last year?
Do you remember Matt Bolesky?
Mm-hmm. Someone traded him for McKinnon or McKinnon for him in the Cupful one year.
I remember that. That was very early.
Yeah, that was like after McKinnon had a down year. And everyone was excited about Matt Bolesky. I don't remember why. But anyways, are you bringing him up as saying that you think Killorn is going to be like Matt Bolesky?
It was a cautionary tale that the Ducks have not heeded, right? Like he had, sorry. Oh, sorry. No. Yeah, it's a cautionary tale that has like some Ducks links, right? Like he had a great season in 2014-15, which was actually 22 goals in 65 games. He only added 10 assists, but also added another 8 goals in 16 games in the playoffs. And that earned him from the Bruins a 5-year, in retrospect, it doesn't sound like that big. It was a 5-year, $4 million average annual AAV contract, average annual 4-year, nope, 5-year, $4 million a year contract from the Boston Bruins. That was in 2015. So that money meant a little more back then. But this sort of feels like that. I mean, not to say, Killorn has more of a proven track record than Bolesky. He's got like some championships. Like maybe this is like a leadershipy kind of signing for the Ducks as they grow that vast prospect pool that you've mentioned. Elon, they want some vet around who's been there, who can show them the right way, who's like, there's an argument to be made that the culture in Tampa seems like good and decent. And if you want to import that culture into your team, you can just pay one guy a lot of money to live in Florida. So it seems like California, there's my US geography knowledge showing through. So Killorn, like it's hard to square the fact that he makes the most of any forward in Anaheim. And by the way, he and Strome are together earning just over $11 million together up until 2027. So that's a lot of cap committed to these two guys. The thing with Killorn is we've never seen him in like a role other than complementary player. And like, yeah, he does have that like potential to be like a helpful hand on the power play. But for all the talk that we've always said about Killorn, which is that you want him when he's playing on the power play, he's never in a season had more than like 14 or 15 power play points. It's just that's when he was relevant and going on runs. His best years have been 60, 65 points. He'll be 34 in September. I'm not anticipating that this is going to be like a really fruitful ad for the Ducks in terms of like production, like offensive production and fancy relevance, or in terms of just general. Like, again, to me, it's just like they wanted some leadership. They paid a lot for it, and we'll see what happens over the next several seasons and whether there's fantasy value to be had from him. But as you can tell, Elon, this is a long way of saying I am not optimistic that Alex Killorn is going to be able to put up a whole lot of points in Anaheim and be any more relevant than he was in Tampa, both due to the change of scenery and due to his age.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Reminds me a lot of when Andre Palat, a year before went to New Jersey. And I'm still like interested in Killorn in terms of like, I would draft him, right? Like he's probably going to get a shot on the, top 6 and top power play. And I think he's worth drafting, but I think like Palat, it'll be a kind of situation where it's like it might not hold it the whole time.
Yeah. Here's my question though, about the top 6 in Anaheim. So like you've got Zegras and you've got Terry. Mm-hmm. Is there anyone, and I won't necessarily shortchange Adam Henrique, all right? And Mason McTavish
McTavish,
I
think
on the come up. Like he hasn't quite arrived yet, but he's working on it. I'm just wondering, Elon, like in Anaheim, is it a top 6 or a top 3?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'd imagine maybe you have Zegras and Terry and McTavish on different lines, and no, I don't know. Like, I get what you're saying. Like, maybe the line mates aren't amazing, but like, I think they'll be pretty decent, and I think he'll get a lot of ice time, and he'll get the power play time. So that's why I wouldn't leave him undrafted. I'm not saying to like reach for Killorn, but I think there could be some sneaky value there. Like, but again, this is kind of like with D'Angelo. Like, I think he could do something, but I don't think it's going to be anything huge. But I think it's worth mentioning on the show. I think we'll mention him again. I
think Palat was a good comp, although I was a lot more interested in Palat and New Jersey, and look how that turned out. So maybe this will be the inverse situation.
Yeah, and then for those of you in Bankers Leagues, Radko Gudas now is going to be in Anaheim for 3 years. So you know what you're going to get from him, and we don't need to discuss him. But yeah, so on the other side there, Tampa loses Killorn. And they also lost Ross Colton, who they traded to Colorado. So yeah, but they lost Corey Perry for what it's worth. They traded him, but they brought in Connor Sherry, who's had some time. We've talked about him on the podcast before when he's gotten in good roles back in Pittsburgh. Most recently in Washington, he had some stretches last year where he was pretty good. And, you look at Alex Killorn, who had 65 points last year, getting a shot on the power play sometimes, playing with Stamkos a lot. And I just wonder, is Connor Sherry just gonna do like Alex Killorn? I kind of think of when we talked on Florida, a couple episodes ago, we talked about how they signed Evan Rodriguez and they traded away Anthony Duclair. And I was kind of thinking well, can't Evan Rodriguez just kind of be the Duclair now? And, we kind of agree there's some value there. And I kind of think it's the same for Connor Sherry now, where if Killorn was able to get 65 points, I don't see they need someone to play that same role that Killorn played last year, right?
Yeah. And the question is, does Sherry have it in him? And at some points it's been yeah, he does have it in him. And at other points I'm oh, not exactly. In Washington, though, we saw that he could play that complementary role reasonably well. It says at least something that when Sherry was playing with Ovechkin or doing clicking with players, we were yeah, go get him. And he had a bit of staying power on rosters through those moments. And also last year, he actually did. Sherry is a reasonably productive player who's just never really gotten a really long look at good deployment. And I wonder if I don't think that's going to change in Tampa, but like you're saying, Elon, I think Killorn isn't a terrible comp to assume he can just come in. And one number really jumps out at me from his season last year, from Sherry's season last year, which is that he participated on only 55% of all goals scored while he's on the ice. And he's usually in on 80% of them. So when you look at his pace last year and see it was just he picked up just 37 points in 82 games. For me, I'm thinking, well, Sherry, he could have had 45 or maybe 50. And if there is a power play job available for him, I'm looking at the Tampa depth chart, I guess Brendan Hagel has first crack on it with Stamkos, Point, and Kucherov. Or maybe Victor Hedman has first crack on it with Stamkos, Point, and Kucherov, or Sergachev, however you want to slice it. But if Sherry does get on the power play in Tampa, I would be interested. And in the meantime, I feel like I could treat him. I'll treat him like Killorn until he shows me that he's not Killorn, either for better or for worse, which is that I'll always have an eye on him. I'll always consider streaming him, but he's not someone I'm not going to trip over myself to go get him.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And yeah, Brandon Hagel is probably going to be the guy in the top 6, and Sherry might get there. We'll have to obviously we'll see in training camp, and he'll be a guy just to kind of watch and pay attention to. I would take Pavel Zacha over Alex Killorn. I think you'll agree with me, right?
Oh yeah, I was actually going to ask you that, but I thought it was too obvious.
Okay. Next up, let's go to Seattle, who didn't do too much, but Edmonton bought out Kailer Yamamoto, and Seattle was like, all right, I'll take him. And now Yamamoto is going to the Kraken. And this is a team we saw last year that, helped some guys that weren't doing so well. Look at Eli Tolvanen and how he was kind of not doing anything in Nashville, wasn't really getting an opportunity. And though I feel like Yamamoto doesn't exactly fit that bill, because it seems like he did get a lot of opportunity in Edmonton and just couldn't do anything with it. I remember there were so many times when we would get excited about how he'd get on the line with McDavid or Draisaitl and be like, okay, time to add him. And then he'd have one good game and then disappear again. Last year, only 25 points in 58 games for Yamamoto, 40 points the year before in a full season. Do you see any value now for the former, 22nd overall pick here in Seattle? Or is he just going to kind of join the Cluj of guys? Maybe he'll take over the Morgan Geekie role and not really actually, prove to be have much value in fantasy, even if it's a useful player maybe for the team or maybe not even.
Not to be pedantic, but what's Cluj?
Cluj? Isn't that just a big group?
Cluj?
Is that not a word? Maybe
I don't even know how to spell it.
Kludge.
Cludge?
A Cluj. It's a word. I'm looking up now. An ill-assorted collection of parts assembled to fulfill a part. Yeah, I think that worked.
I looked up Cludge and it says a toilet.
Okay, Brian, I'm looking it up right now. Kludge. And I just listened, and it's pronounced Cluj, and it means an ill-assorted collection of parts assembled to fulfill a particular purpose. Okay. It's a real word.
I see that with a K.
I feel like you're very much you doubt me. You think I'm a dum-dum.
I love these words you pull out. I just wasn't sure if you meant to say collage or dilute. There's some other word that just came out.
It just came to my head, and it was.
I'm still very interested that the entry for Cludge with a C is a toilet or an alternative form of Kluge.
Well, I was talking about the K version. But
Yeah.
anyways,
Well, K for
Yamamoto.
Kyler. Yeah.
Now
So
that you've used up all this time to talk about the word kludge, you could just say like pass on Yamamoto and we can move on.
yeah, pass on Yamamoto and we can move on. I'm not gonna. I'll lie. I was feeling nostalgic and looking through our old Facebook group, which is archived for anyone who happened to be in it when we closed it. And there's a game night thread from October 2017. It's the first night of the season that I posted, and the headline is "Happy 2017 Hockey Day, everybody! It's Yammer time." And like the big photo, the headline photo was McDavid sitting next to Yamamoto on the bench. We've been waiting a long time for Yamamoto to do something. I get the feeling he's not going to do anything. And I'm going to say, like, basically, remember what we said about Morgan Geekie coming from Seattle, where you can't break out and be a superstar or a star? Yamamoto is not any better set up. Like, maybe he can have like a strong like turn at some point, or Donato, and he can have his moment in the sun, but it'll be over and then you won't want him on your roster. So yeah, you can probably just pass.
Yeah. And another guy I'll mention on Seattle, this is like not a guy to draft, but just remember like Martin Jones, who was the backup last year and actually got a run of games at some point because Grubauer was struggling. Martin Jones is a UFA. He hasn't been signed by any team yet. I'm interested if he'll even get a tryout somewhere in the NHL. Forget that guy. Anyways, but Seattle did re-sign and he was a UFA. He could have gone anywhere, but they signed Joey Decord. And it looks like Decord's now going to be their backup. And Decord is coming off an incredible playoffs. He had a .926 save percentage, leading the Coachella Valley Firebirds to the finals in the AHL. So like he he could have maybe had some offers from other teams, but he went back to Seattle. And we know that Grubauer is not like a sure thing. Like obviously going into the season, Seattle would be happy for Grubauer to be a volume starter. And like anyone who drafts him will be happy for him to achieve that. But like if he struggles, Joey Decord. So a name to remember, at least for streaming, if nothing else, when when he gets announced to play a game.
For sure. And Grubauer, I think with his playoff performance, probably established himself as like the sure starter, but they could still split or do 2/3. I mean, Grubauer had a really good year last year, like in the regular season too. At 5-on-5, he was fantastic. Shorthanded for the fourth of 5 years he played under expected, but he was closer to expected than he usually had been. So like that seems to be a nagging issue for Grubauer. But I think he has a pretty steady grasp on the number one job going into camp. But that said, yeah, I mean, Joey Decord, hard worker, loves the game. And okay. I think he has potential as a backup to come up and steal some starts and show that he's ready for more. He hasn't in his NHL time to date really been able to show much of what he's capable of, or at least I hope he's capable of more than he's shown. So we'll be watching, but it is good to know, Elon, who Philip Grubauer's backup is, and that Joey Decord could be capable of stealing a few starts if Grubauer falters.
Yeah, like obviously, yeah, Grubauer's a starter going into the year, but it's just like, yeah, if he stinks, something could happen. Though Shams is bringing up a good point. They do have another goalie under contract, like Chris Drieger, who was injured for like all of last year. He ended up coming to the team at the end, like he got healthy, and then they like put him on waivers and no one claimed him because he has a big contract. And then he went to the AHL and did okay. He had 908 save percentage, but he was the backup for Decord for this playoff run with Coachella Valley. So I'd imagine that like Decord is the front runner. Like he got a 2-year contract. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, could be obviously training camp. Like Decord will have to earn the job over Chris Drieger. So we'll see. Finally, let's go to Montreal and then we'll get to some Green Boys. We're already like late into the this is us, right?
Do you want to?
We'll do more shows.
Do you want to do the Green Boys this show, or do you want to?
Well, let's talk about Montreal. Let's figure it out. But this is a quick one. The Habs didn't do too much, right? They re-signed Sean Monahan. They were happy with what they saw in the short stint before he got injured. That's cool. They also traded a couple picks and a prospect for Alex Newhook, another one of these guys like a Pavel Zacha, right? Who was drafted, well, and like obviously a Kirby Dach, who was drafted super high by the Avs in this case, and just kind of hasn't been able to, do anything close to what they were hoping to get with this pick. It was 16th overall in 2019. So obviously not as high as Kirby Dach was when he was drafted, but Newhook last year, played 82 games, only 30 points, not a guy I don't think we mentioned on the podcast pretty much at all. Maybe once in a while he got some power play time, but he goes to the Habs. And I don't know, anything there, Brian? Like, is he someone on your radar at all? Like, because we saw Kirby Dach do pretty well, when he got to Montreal. So maybe Newhook could be another Kirby Dach.
I mean, I'm wide open to Alex Newhook finding success in Montreal. I'm not sure if the lineup is deep enough for that to happen now. But if you're going to try and rehab a career, like this seems to be Montreal's MO right now, right? Like this is a very Montreal acquisition. Newhook, of course, that has not done a whole lot in the NHL, but has not been given a whole lot of opportunity in the NHL. Hasn't done enough, I guess, to earn more play or better deployment in Colorado. He was picked 16th overall back in 2019, but I'm pretty sure watching that draft, like it was a bit of a surprise that Newhook had fallen as far as he did. Although looking ahead, there's like a lot of good players too that went, before him. So I think it's a really interesting gambit by the Habs. As for whether it can make Newhook relevant, I think it could. Like if you have Caulfield and Suzuki and like let's say Josh Anderson on the top line, then Newhook gets to play with Kirby Dach and maybe Brendan Gallagher. And that could be an interesting line to watch. Of course, Slafkovsky is in the picture here somewhere too. So there's at least like there's questions to go around, questionable talent to go around. There's a chance for Newhook.
There's another guy also, by the way, this guy Sean Farrell, who they drafted pretty late, but he had an incredible year in college last year, and they brought him up right at the end of last season. Another short guy. By the way, Newhook's like 5'10". Farrell's so I don't know, like maybe they could fight for the same spot in training camp.
You definitely have Farrell on your dynasty team, right? This
is
why it's coming up. Oh,
okay. No, look at his stats. Farrell's an actual high pedigree prospect. A lot of people consider him one of the top prospects on Montreal after Slafkovsky.
They also have.
I know prospects. I know words and I know prospects.
They have Raphael Harvey-Pinard also in the mix too. Like there's a lot going on in Montreal. So when we saw Dach, it was working for him on the wing. It wasn't working for him at center, but Montreal was like, that's fine. Doesn't have to work for you right now. This is where we want you to be long-term centering on the second line. So we don't know if Montreal's going to use Newhook in a way that lets him be his best offensive self or just shapes him into the player that they hope him to be. Someone to keep an eye on, Elon. Like I'm going to be interested to see how his first 10 games go.
Now I'm extra invested in Sean Farrell after that's like to me like the sign of like Brian not believing in a guy that I bring up is when you're like, do you have him on your dynasty team and that's why you're bringing him up? That's how I know.
I would say most times that you bring up a prospect, it's because you have him on your dynasty team, and you're not always like you were upfront about Zamula earlier tonight, but I don't think you're always so upfront. So I think like that disclosure is important.
Okay, well, no. I have actually been in some trade talks to potentially acquire Sean Farrell.
That was my next question. Was that this is it? I knew it. Like, of course.
But I also knew who he was.
Yeah, do you know where he's from?
I listened to Fantasy Hockey Life and the Dauber Prospects Report.
Well, I bet you didn't know he's from Hopkinton, Massachusetts.
No, that's what I have to listen to this podcast to get that kind of data. All right, Brian, let's take a break and let's dive into our Green Boys here. I could go for at least another half hour. So we'll save the Red Boys and maybe some Green Boys for the next show. But next up after the break, we are going to talk about players who were not so great in the first half and then were like much, much better in the second half. And Brian will try to explain what happened and what to predict next year. So we'll get to that in just a second. Listen to Keeping Karlsson. Is that good with you, Brian? I can also, I think that's good, right? You want it to go until around 10:30. So
sounds good to me.
Okay.
I'm good to go whenever. I know you have limits.
I mean, if we can get through these guys, let's see how it goes. I know you said you have deep dives, so we'll just do as much as we can.
Yeah.
Say around 10:45. I'll definitely want to cut it. Okay.
Whenever.
Bye. Okay.
Do you want my fan, by the way?
Sure.
Okay.
Put an edit point here. Just remember to check the fan. 58 minutes. Fan. Okay, let's go.
Okay.
All right, we are back, Brian, and now we are looking into the Red Boys, Green Boys spreadsheet, which I will share with the patrons. So if I don't share it in the Discord, someone just remind me, and then I'll share it because I just thought of that now. But I have a spreadsheet here. All the players are sorted by the ones with the biggest difference in their pace from the second half to the first half to the biggest difference in the negative. And we're going to be looking at the positives, the players who did a lot better. Number one on the list with a bullet. Let's just get right into it. Patrick Laine. Holy cow! I didn't even recall how like crummy he was in the first half of the season. I'm gonna say crummy, I mean by his standards, but like only 16 points in 24 games for Laine. He missed some time with injury He also missed some time in the second half of the injury. So like maybe this is like a bit of a small sample size to compare, but yeah, he was like seeming like a little bit of a bust for anyone who drafted him super high. But then he came back and was crazy in the second half. 36 points in 31 games. And this was on a Columbus team that was like depleted. Like we've talked about all the injuries, especially to the defense. And they had no one on defense. But Laine was still like, doing really well. Now coming into next year, Werenski's going to be healthy. They have Fantilli on the team. I don't know, like you'd expect things to be a lot better potentially around him. And yeah, he's coming off a second half of the league. So overall, you look at a guy who was under a point per game, right? He had 52 points in 55 games overall. But yeah, since the new year, since actually my cutoff was January 9th, that's where I was able to figure most players had around 41 games around January 9th. So yeah, since then, yeah, like I said, 95 point pace if you pace it out for those 31 games he played. So do you think that Patrik Laine is as good as he was in that second half, or was there some variance there? And he's really just like, yeah, just call him around a point per game.
Yeah, well, there's two questions for a lot of these guys, right? Like, is Patrik Laine as good as the second half, or is he as bad as his first half, right? Or is the answer somewhere in between, which, as you mentioned at the top, is my favorite way to go with that sort of question. I'm gonna try at least give you the good so that you have the data to decide for yourself, and I'll give you my conclusion too. But my starting point for Laine is like with that huge second half, he still paced for 35 goals. I'm kind of tempted to say just 35 goals. I mean, it's still a really nice number, but that's about as close as we've seen Laine get to his rookie and sophomore heyday when he paced for 40 goals and then put up 44 goals as a sophomore, respectively. So that's exciting that Laine is getting there, but just to temper that a little bit, like for anyone tempted to think that now Laine is on this upward trajectory to 40 goals and beyond again, I don't think so. All season long, Laine actually shot at a pretty reasonable 5-on-5 shooting percentage based on his career track record, which is about 13%. And in the second half, Laine actually took fewer shots at 5-on-5. So this is not the hallmark of somebody who is about to get a whole bunch more goals. Is it possible? Sure. He's done it before. He's done it twice before. Is it likely based on what I'm seeing? I don't think so. And so the question is, well, if Laine's not scoring a whole lot more goals, then how's he getting all these points in the second half? It was powered mostly by an uptick in the other way you get points, assists.
That was going to be my guest. Yeah.
Yes, I almost put it to, which, really is something we should be getting used to by now, that Laine is setting others up. The last time Laine scored more goals than he did register assists was 2018-19, his third year in the league. And those assists for Laine in the second half of last year were high. They came fast and furious, partially because he was in on 90% of all goals scored while he was on the ice, and that's a high points participation rate. But at the same time, he's usually in on like 80%, so it's not a huge difference. And I don't see much evidence that Laine or his line played a whole lot better in that second half. Like, they continued scoring at about a pretty pedestrian goals for rate, actually. But I think the difference in Laine's own production was that he was pointing on 9 out of 10 goals scored while he was on the ice, instead of 7 out of 10 goals scored while he was on the ice, which describes his first half. He's usually on 8 out of 10. So split the difference. There you go. But of course, like, it's not just 5-on-5 assists that made Laine's second half stand out so much. Laine in the Columbus power play found their groove in the second half. They also did not have a groove in the first half. Up to mid-January, Patrik Laine had just 4 points in his first 30 games. That's pacing for an 11 power play point full season pace. The Blue Jackets were converting on just 14% of their power play opportunities. But then in the last 25 games, Laine had 12 power play points in his last 25 games. That's a 40 power play point pace full season. And the team was converting on 23% of the power play opportunities. So I think that was a big storyline between Laine's first half and second half. And Elon, I should also, like, big overarching idea here is what you already said, which is that, like, Laine played and was injured and played and was injured. So, like, missed a not unsubstantial amount of time. So I'm not going to read too deep into, I'm giving you what I've got, and I'm treating it like a full season's worth of data, but we should at least recognize that it's not. But still, when the Columbus power play was not doing terribly, they were doing fantastic. And Laine was in on that. He's still the trigger man with the man advantage. He himself had 6 power play goals on 28 power play shots. I think there was actually a 7th in there somewhere, but I couldn't find it on Natural Stat Trick. But it was appearing on Hockey Reference. Anyway, what does this all mean for next year? All right, that Laine in the second half was involved more in the offense, assisting more, being a contributor on the Columbus power play. Well, the first thing is that I think he has a really nice baseline, right? If anyone's worried about Laine just like totally conking out and disappointing, I don't see that happening. I see Laine having at least 50 5-on-5 points, and then at least 20 power play points. And I think both of those could be a touch conservative, right? They only come to 70. And this is a guy, even with a slow first half, who paced for a point per game last season. One thing that I like for Laine next year, I wonder if his like top line center situation will stabilize a bit. He was mostly split up between Roslovic and Jenner, and the time with Roslovic, I mean, I'm not saying it went like particularly terribly, but from what we've seen so far, it doesn't seem like Columbus really thinks that Roslovic is a long-term solution as a top
Jenner was
6.
injured, right? That's the big thing. Also, Columbus needs to like be healthy for a year, and then we can actually see what they can do.
Yeah, and I think like to the second point about the power play, like, are they going to go 14% again? It could happen for a short while, but I don't think it'll happen for as long as it happened. Like it was like 3.5 months of disaster on the Columbus power play, and that's because of all the injuries, especially with Zach Werenski, right? So better power play performance, healthy roster, some friendly 5-on-5 variants, all of that could get Patrik Laine up to a near point per game pace, or maybe even like if everything breaks really well, like upside is higher than a point per game. But also the downside doesn't seem huge for Laine either. So for anyone scared off by that early bit of the season, I would say don't be. I would say you're drafting at least a 70-point player, probably someone in the range of 75 to 80 points with upside for even more. And like you said, Elon, Laine's success was kind of under the radar last year. So if you can zero in on that, you could be happy on draft day.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm pretty stoked for Laine, and I think that you can get some value. Of course, when you say it, and then all of a sudden, when you call someone a sleeper or whatever, then that ends up not being as true. But like, if you look at, I've actually been doing one of these mock drafts. I had to get in on the fun myself, and I was able to get Laine in. Let me find it here. I had the 10th overall pick. So in the first round, I got 11th overall. Kucherov round 1. Then I flipped around. Ovechkin round 2. Then we did third round reversal. So I also had an early pick in round 3. I took Gensel, and then it like went all the way around. And then I got Laine round 4. This is like very late in the draft. So like around guys like Fiala, Tuck, Svechnikov went right before I took Laine. So
and who went after?
Nico Hischier, Dylan Larkin, Zach Hyman.
Yeah. That seems about where he belongs.
I don't know, but I think he has maybe upside for more.
Upside for more.
Yeah. I like Laine. Also, don't forget about Johnny Gaudreau. Like, he doesn't fit into this category. He was kind of similar in the first and second half. But if everyone's healthy, like, Gaudreau also has the opportunity to bounce back. Like, I think he could do better than the 74 points that he had last year. So, but every year I'm excited about Columbus, and they always let me down. But last year, I feel like you can just put a big asterisk because everyone got injured, and a team with no defenseman isn't going to get too many points. Okay, next up in the list here, we've got a couple guys. Okay, I'll just throw it out there. Like, we don't need to discuss this because there's some obvious ones, right? Like, Barrett Hayton is next on the list, but like, the answer is obvious, right? In the first half of the season, he was playing with like nobodies. He was playing here. I even have it here. Nick Ritchie and Zach Cassian were his most common line mates. Or Christian Fischer. And then in the second half, as we all know, Hayton got on the line with Keller and Schmaltz and got on the top power play, and things went much better. And that answers that question, right? And obviously going into next season, he's likely going to be centering Keller and Schmaltz and not Ritchie. I'm assuming you agree with me, right? That it's we're going to expect second half Hayton to be the more realistic version.
Yeah, deployment seems fully it for Barrett Hayton. I don't think we need to go a lot deeper. Like, I could cite some of his numbers and you might be like, I'm not about to quote a whole bunch of like unfriendly variants, let me just start over. Yeah, it's an open and shut case for Barrett Hayton, right? Things got better for him. He was deployed like a top power play player, and he did well in those roles too. He had a great impact on his team's 5-on-5 offense. He earned his standing on the top line. One curious thing so far is that he hasn't been like a terribly involved player in his team's offense. His points participation rate was 51% last year, which for a forward is ridiculous. Like that's a high-end defenseman's participation. A forward usually is at least 60 to 70%. And that's like on the low end. Like I would 70% is where I'd expect. So if what I'm saying here is if there's more regression to come for him, the weird thing though is that he's had this 50 to 55% number over his first 150 games. So for Barrett Hayton, I hope he gets more involved in the offense and doesn't just watch it as a pedestrian. But we saw him getting involved last year. I think a lot of his numbers under the hood look reasonably healthy too. And I don't think, like I said, it's open and shut. So we opened it and now I am actually going to shut it.
Yeah, Hayden, 31 points in 43 games in the second half of the year. I don't see why he doesn't start the season centering Keller, who just had that incredible season. Okay, another guy that's up here is like Sammy Blais. We've talked about him, right? He was getting no role at all on the Rangers, and then he was put into offensive situations in St. Louis. Another obvious one, Evan Bouchard did a lot better in the second half. I wonder why. Oh, it's because the Tyson Barrie got traded and he jumped to the top power play and destroyed. And now, again, next year, I'd expect of course, he's going to be on the top power play. So definitely second half Bouchard is more representative. Another name, by the way, Rasmus Sandin. We recall he was on Toronto, not doing much and then he went to Washington and John Karlsson was injured, so he got on the top power play, so he did a lot better. So those are the names that like I don't want to waste our time, but obviously,
right. Yeah. And with Sandin, like Karlsson is, I think, likely to be healthy, right?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't expect to see the same performance out of Sandin as you already saw.
Yeah. So we're gonna do these green boys that like didn't have a huge obvious change in their deployment, or at least in their situation. Yeah. So the next up I want to bring up is Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who ended the season like nothing special, 43 points. But if you look deeper, he started the season as like a total nobody. It was doing that like 13 points in 40 games for Kotkaniemi. But then in the second half, 30 points in 42 games, which is basically a 60-point pace, which is draftable. If we think that what Kotkaniemi did in the second half is what he can continue to do, then maybe he is someone that I remember going into drafts last year. A lot of people were saying that he could be like a good sleeper and he might get like a top 6 role in Carolina, and they don't even have a top 6. They're like top 9 or whatever, however they work it out. But what do you think about that second half for Kotkaniemi? I'm seeing here he played with Necas and Svechnikov, or Necas and Teravainen at the end when Svechnikov was injured. So he was in a good spot. But he was also in that spot like for a lot of the season. So obviously something just broke right in the second half. What was it?
Well, it seems like Kotkaniemi's best production came with Martin Necas, right? And Necas, of course, picked up 28 goals, 43 assists for 71 points in his age 24 season. And Necas saw increased ice time, shot rates, pretty entrenched role on the top power play. And Kotkaniemi actually began the season alongside Necas, seeing 15, 19, it was a big range, somewhere between 15 and 19 minutes a night on average, with Necas and Svechnikov. But after 10 games with them, Kotkaniemi hadn't been productive at all. I actually remember, Elon, watching the Tier 1 Sweden auction draft for Cupful, and I think Brandon took Kotkaniemi like very, very late, like with a $1 bid. And I was actually like blown away. Like I hadn't even considered that Kotkaniemi could be fantasy relevant. And Brandon came on, shared his reason. I'm like, oh yeah, like this is a very interesting and possible idea. And of course, Kotkaniemi started the year with this great deployment, but in his first 10 games had just 2 assists and 18 shots to show for it, which also, by the way, is probably not the standard by which Kotkaniemi is being measured by Rod Brindamore, right? Like, I don't think Rod Brindamore is looking for production. Like it wasn't like, I don't know exactly, but I can't imagine it being, you're not producing offensively with Necas and Svechnikov, so get out of there. But in our fantasy lens, this is what's important to us, right? After that, Kotkaniemi played with a mix of guys like Teravainen, Jarvis, Nason, Stepan, not really finding offensive success anywhere. And he saw his time on ice sink to 12, 14 minutes a night, best case. So there were many nights where he was between 10 and 12 minutes. And so Kotkaniemi, I think, was being asked to work on his game and figure things out so that he can be what I think the Canes want him to be, which is like, I'm not going to say the same thing as Jordan Staal, but I think they'd like Kotkaniemi to be a really responsible, two-way, defensively oriented centerman. I don't think Carolina is really invested in Kotkaniemi putting up a whole lot of points, which is something we need to be mindful of for fantasy purposes. But then Kotkaniemi, after working on his game, being in the dugouts. He got promoted again, playing with Necas and Svechnikov, then Necas and Teravainen, seeing 15 to 17 minutes a night again on average, sometimes more, sometimes less. But the productivity comes this time with this opportunity for Jesperi Kotkaniemi. He goes on a tear, 11 goals, 16 assists, 27 points in 35 games, just 60 shots. But this is all good for a 63-point full season pace. And I guess the question now is, like, do we think that what he did in those 35 games, that 63-point pace, can Kotkaniemi replicate that over 82? And one thing that, someone you might look at and say, well, Kotkaniemi was shooting 18%, but he is one of those guys I was referencing earlier where like one or two more goals that go in or not make a big difference in that percentage number because there's so little shot volume coming from Kotkaniemi. So I'm not looking too much at that. I do see that his shot selection and shot danger was higher than it's ever been before in his career. That's something. And his time with Necas saw him with like a really productive and successful line. So I think it meant a lot for Kotkaniemi to be with Martin Necas. And so I started this bit talking about Necas, and I'm ending it with that too. Like, I'm interested in Kotkaniemi if he stays with Necas. I think he could be a 60-point player with like in that spot with Necas and Svechnikov if things break right. Of course, the problem remains. Like, I don't think he's going to start taking more shots, and there's a good chance that Kotkaniemi could find himself away from Necas. And still like is not, if they need another line shored up defensively and Kotkaniemi's scoring away on the second line, I think Carolina would probably prioritize the former and say, like, we need you to do more. I guess like, so then it's like, well, can Kotkaniemi stay with Necas on the Carolina depth chart? And Elon, I'm curious to see, like we were talking about the defensive depth chart, but there's a lot of question marks in Carolina too, right? You've got Bunting, Jarvis, Aho, Svechnikov, Necas, right? You've got 5 locked in, and then I guess you have Kotkaniemi and Teuvo Teravainen, right? Like, I don't know if I'm missing anyone here.
But the only thing is that there's only 2 centers there, Aho and Kotkaniemi, unless Necas plays center, I guess.
So and this is the question, right? Like, Kotkaniemi can be the second line center if Necas is on the wing, but if Necas is on the wing, then that means Teravainen doesn't fit in the top 6.
Oh, so complicated.
So if or Jarvis or Bunting, like, this is why I brought up these guys. If Kotkaniemi moves to center another line, then they can put all those wingers in the top 6 instead of like, because their third line, Carolina's weird. Their third line, Martinic, Stahl, and Fast, like, that's not changing, right? So if you're not in the top 6, you're on the 4th line. So it's a weird situation.
Get Brindamore on the phone. We got to ask him because I don't know what they're going to do. It'll be interesting to follow for sure. But yeah, Kotkaniemi. So we've seen now that he has some upside. And, you don't want to only look at that final season point totals. And someone like that also, the next Green Boy, this is going to be my last like Green Boy of someone who's like, you're going to be like, why are we even talking about this person? But okay, we brought him up before a little bit. Rasmus Ristolainen, I have to bring him up because he is like a huge, if you go like based on like percentage difference, he's like higher than like all these people, because in the first half of the season, Rasmus Ristolainen played 34 games and had 2 points. He had no goals and 2 assists in 34 games. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, in the second half in 40 games, 18 points, which is like pretty good, a 37-point pace. And a 37-point pace for a bangers defenseman is like pretty like valuable in leagues that count the categories, that Ristolainen gives you outside of the points. So if there's any, and we've already discussed before how now with Provorov gone, D'Angelo gone, like maybe Ristolainen has a shot at some power play time, or at least like more even strength, like ice time. So I wonder if maybe he can't, but he is Rasmus Ristolainen, who I know like isn't very good, but also like someone needs to play.
Yeah. And like, it wasn't that long ago, Rasmus Ristolainen was a power play 1 quarterback in Buffalo. Like, this is pre-Dahlin, right? Ristolainen was the guy quarterbacking the top unit, and while he was racking up these like 45 point seasons on that top unit, a lot of people, that's when the debate really started raging, right? Because he shot, he hit, he blocked, he had a terrible plus minus. And the question was like, is this guy good? He was playing 27 minutes a night. And the question was Ristolainen good, or is he just quarterbacking a top power play and surviving the rest of the time. And we haven't seen any kind of offensive promise from Ristolainen without that top power play time until the last 37 games of last year, where Ristolainen had 18 points. So that's a 40-point full season pace. And curiously, he did this. I just talked about Ristolainen being like a 25 to 27 minute player. He's actually seen his ice time go below 20 minutes last year for the first time since he was a rookie. So he took about a 2.5 minute cut on the whole. So what's the deal? All right. How did Ristolainen get on a 40-point pace? Like, he's basically been a 20-point player at 5-on-5 with 0 power play production. So what happened at 5-on-5 last year is his points participation rate nearly doubled all the way up to 40%. And I say all the way up. That's what we'd expect like a good offensive involved defenseman to have. Rasmus Ristolainen has generally been in like the 25% points participation territory. But also Ristolainen got that power play run roll back when Tony DeAngelo fell out of favor, right? And on the power play, Ristolainen did stuff. He had 4 power play points in about 20 games, quarterbacking the units. It's a 16 power play point pace, which is a little off the numbers of his Buffalo QB heyday. But at the same time, it's not nothing, like I said. And there's an outside chance that Ristolainen is relevant next year as a power play 1 quarterback. I just wonder, like, Elon, you talked about his peripheral benefits. And yeah, he's good for a couple hits, a couple blocks a game, but the man doesn't shoot. Last year, Ristolainen had barely a shot per game. While he was quarterbacking the top unit in Buffalo, part of that power play was about him taking shots. So he would take like 2.5 shots a night. If he's on the top power play and he gets back to shooting, yeah, he could reclaim some of that fancy value he had in those Buffalo days, which makes Ristolainen not a bad flyer to take as your third or fourth defenseman. But I still I wouldn't be surprised to see Cam York at least get a chance to audition. And again, like I see like an Addison Spurgeon possibility here, where Ristolainen isn't even quite Spurgeon, but he was there to finish the year quarterbacking the top power play unit. So we can't rule it out. Not a bad like late rounds pick, just to see what happens. And actually, Elon, like we were talking about Cam York being someone that we wouldn't really draft. I would draft Ristolainen before York, even if York is like, if it's looking 50-50 for who's going to quarterback the top unit, or even it's going to be like, let's give York a short tryout, I would still, take a chance on Ristolainen before I did on York.
Interesting. Yeah. I would say more like if it's a league with 4 defenseman spots, like a couple, I'd say like 4th or 5th defenseman, not 3rd or 4th defense. Like, I don't think he's going to be my 3rd
No,
defenseman.
You're right. That sounds more right. Yeah.
Okay, so next up, let's go to the Kings. Okay, they had a couple guys, actually, a couple top liners who had very different first and second halves, and those are Anze Kopitar and Adrian Kempe. So I could just do them both as a double here. Starting with Kopitar, he had only 33 points in the first 44 games of the season, so that's only a 62-point pace. It was looking like Kopitar was starting to decline. To some maybe, but obviously not to Kopitar. He in the second half, much better. In 38 games, he had 41 points, so over point per game, up to an 88-point pace, so not too shabby, going from a 62 pace to an 88 pace to end him right where he usually ends up, around 74. But it's interesting, right? Because we're used to Kopitar being like 70-ish point guy, like consistently, but this was like nothing like that. He was like much lower than much higher. And then Kempe, even more pronounced, right? Only 28 points in his first 44 games. So that was only a 52-point pace for the first half of the year. Kempe was looking like a huge bust. And then he exploded in the second half, 38 points in 38 games, that 24 goals in those 38 games. He was like scoring like a 45 goal scorer. Like, it was an incredible second half. And I'd imagine these two are like connected. I'm sure there's a reason why. And maybe the answer is going to be because they started playing with Quinton Byfield. I guess you'll let me know, Brian. But yeah, like, what was the difference between the first? Was it just that finally LA was? My theory's always been that like when a team has a good goalie, like it kind of helps with the offense too, because they could play a little bit more loose. Like when you have like, you can't trust your goalie, you have to be so careful not to make a mistake, because any mistake will turn into a goal, because you can't trust Cal Peterson to stop a puck. But once they got Copley in there and eventually Korpisalo, I don't know. Is that anything? I'm trying to come up with theories as to why LA scored more goals, and specifically that top line was scoring more goals in the second half.
It's always a good theory. I've checked into it a couple times, and I haven't seen that teams play like remarkably differently in front of goalies, but I would be interested in seeing somebody show otherwise, show some hard data. This is something like in the early day. I keep getting nostalgic this episode, but like back when we started the show, there were like a lot of blogs with people publicly sharing their work because teams weren't hiring anyone. And now all those people have been hired and don't share their work publicly anymore, which is, great for the game, I guess. Anyway, but that's the sort of thing that would be covered on one of those blogs. So if anyone's out there or knows something that maybe it was, let us know. It's interesting you make the point, Elon, though, because like a lot of your like to find the red and green boys, like you did like that just like solid cut at 41 games. But like it's not always that first half, second half, like first 41 and second 41. And like that break happened exactly on January 9th. For Adrian Kempe, that happened on December 10th. So I would actually say like when things really got going for him, which is like 2 months into the season. So I almost feel like instead of saying this was a great, like a crazy different second half for Kempe, I might just say it was a slow start for Kempe. And I'll get more into the numbers, but just to answer your question, Elon, or maybe add some anecdotal data to support what you're saying. Phoenix Copley's first start of the season, December 6th. Second start of the season was December 10th when Kempe started getting on fire.
There it is.
Yeah. So starting December 10th, Kempe had 33 goals and 18 assists for 51 points in 53 games and 172 shots. All right. So that's like 3.5 shots per game. He also had 17 power play points over those final 53 games, including 10 power play goals. Kempe also had 3 shorthanded goals in that span, which I didn't actually look it up, but that has to be one of the highest number of shorthanded markers over the last several months of the season, and 5 game-winning goals, by the way, for Kempe too, for anyone still counting those. And if you are still counting them in your league, you can't really like we've gone into why we don't love them, but of course any goal you score is like a lotto ticket to have the game-winning goal. But you compare all that to before December 10th, when Cal Peterson was still starting. Kempe had 16 points in 29 games, so barely half a point per game pace, wasn't shooting as much, 78 shots, and just 3 power play points over 29 games for Kempe. So one thing I'll point at right away to show the disparity between like the second chunk Kempe, December 10th forward Kempe, and slow start Kempe, is that he was shooting 20% over the stretch that Kempe was really rolling, which is double the 10% that Kempe was shooting for the first couple months of the season. But at 5-on-5, I'm not about to say like this is not okay, because at 5-on-5, Kempe's numbers were pretty stable. Most of that big shooting success came on the power play for Kempe, where he shot 25% during this run, which honestly is not a terribly unreasonable way to pick up 10 power play goals. 20 to 25% on the power play, cool. Maybe not all entirely repeatable, but still not so out of the realm of possibility. And again, it's a small sample. So what? You're going to take 1 or 2 power play goals away from him to regress that? Fine, no big deal. Kempe's still awesome. More importantly, Kempe was shooting, as I mentioned, a lot more over the rest of the season from December onwards, 3.5 shots per game versus the 2.5 shots per game in the first couple months. And I think one factor there, Elon, was getting consistent power play time. I don't know if you remember this. I didn't. But I don't even know if I did once I looked it up, but in the first couple months of the season, the Kings were basically splitting time evenly between their power play units. Like about half the time, the second power play unit. So that's like Dino, Arvidsson, Moore, and Jersey, of course. Yeah. some more time than the top power play unit, like which is all the names we'd expect to be on the top unit. Once that changed and the top unit became the top unit every single night, Kempe got on his horse and was off to the races. So next year, are we looking at point per game Adrian Kempe? Yeah, I think so. Like maybe he'll see a little regression in his power play goal scoring and shorthanded goal scoring. Like I don't know if he can pace for, another 6 shorthanded goals over 82 games. That's a lot to ask. But even then, we've got a pretty confident 70 points here. And upside for more. Kempe's got minutes. He takes a lot of shots, top line, top power play. I'm buying in here. And my question for you, Elon, is who would you rather, Adrian Kempe or Patrick Laine?
Laine. But I do like Kempe, but I really like Laine.
I thought you would say Kempe because he takes more shots.
Who would you take?
I think I would take Kempe for the shots. Like, I think the upside is a little lower. And I've been on record as saying, like, Kempe is like a really boring 55, 60 point guy. I've seen enough to move me off of that and think that he's 70 and upside of point per game. And I grant that Line has more upside, but I guess you're just trading off, like, okay, am I going to take Kempe shots, or am I going to take the chance that Line can really blow the doors off?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely go either way, right? That's a really fun comparison. Let me check out this draft here that I'm doing and see where did Kempe get drafted. But okay, maybe while you're talking about Ajay Kopitar, I can look that up, so I'm not like wasting time here.
Yeah, sure. Well, for Kopitar, it's not a totally different story. Like for him, his first quarter was off, just like Kempe. 14 points in 21 games, taking fewer than 2 shots per game for Kopitar. But the rest of the season, quarters 2, 3, and 4, Kopitar was rolling. Part of that is the power play, for sure, as mentioned with Kempe. And that power play, by the way, was scoring on nearly 17% of its shots on goal. So Kopitar was up above 20% shooting as well on the power play. So again, like, I could see regression coming for all there, not regression that's going to crush them all, but it just a little baby bit. But at 5-on-5, Kopitar bounced back from a bad 21-22 season where both his own personal shooting percentage and on-ice shooting percentage were some of the lowest of his career, and he still managed a 68-point pace. That continued into the first quarter for Kopitar, and we were a little worried. That's like, oh my gosh, this is crossed the boundary of a season, and like, is this the end of Kopitar? But age 35 Kopitar said, no, like, I'm going to go back to being the super steady guy I've always been. And I'm wondering if age 36 Kopitar can do the same, and just be like another near point per game player. I'm a bigger believer that Kopitar is closer to his pace last year, or like near point per game, than he was the year before at 68 point pace. I think another 70 plus is definitely doable, especially with the emergence of Kempe and hopefully growth from Quinton Byfield, which you alluded to earlier. And one really fun thing happening with old man Kopitar is that the last 2 seasons have seen him and his line mates producing some of the best offensive expected goals rates that he's ever seen on the ice. It's not quite like Bergeron, where he like had that like reverse trajectory as he got older, but Kopitar is like also known for being a great two-way player, a great defensive centerman, and in the twilight of his career is seeing like, it's I think some of it is deployment and style, like in coaching style too. Like, he's got 2 players who are offensive players. He can be that, like Kopitar can be in on that. And it's just fun to see all of a sudden that his line is more productive than basically any of his lines have ever been in his career.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting in LA, right? Because now they have Pierre-Luc Dubois coming into the fold. I don't know if how that's going to play with the power play, but it's just hard to imagine Kopitar not getting like a ton of ice time, right? If you want to win, you probably want to be having Kopitar on the ice a lot. By the way, Kempe was drafted in the 6th round of my mock draft here by Kevin, cupful coordinator Kevin, who I'll be honest, I didn't even realize he was in the draft.
And you had Liney in the 4th.
Yeah, so maybe I reached. I don't know.
So would you rather? So now the question is, would you rather Kempe in the 6th and Liney in the 4th? I guess it doesn't. That's like a keeper question. Like, you could have both. You don't have to choose between them.
I guess that's true. Yeah, I actually tried something new in this draft. It was the 5th round. I'd already taken 4 forwards. I figured I should, switch, and I was going to take a defenseman, but then I didn't really like any of the options that were there. So I just grabbed Vasilevsky, who was still out there. And I don't know. I'm curious to see if I'll do that in the real cupful, because this is my first snake draft in a while, right? I've been doing auctions, so it'll be fun to like make these decisions. But I think at some point, we've raised goalie wins by 1 point now for next year, and Vasilevsky gets a lot of wins, so maybe and he's like such a sure thing, like like in a league where goalies are so, and like no goalies are sure things, like they're so unreliable. Vasilevsky seems pretty reliable.
Yeah, I guess as a workhorse, like, the wins are still there. I look at Tampa maybe being on going down the hill, like being on the other side of the hill, and I look at the rest of the Atlantic getting strong, and I just wonder if there's going to be a couple less wins. Potentially. Yeah. Interesting. Was he the first goalie taken?
No. Shesterkin was the first goalie taken.
Yeah.
But I think he was the second goalie taken. Would you have taken someone else instead of Vasilevsky?
No, I think Vasilevsky makes sense. And then it's like, we've had this conversation, right? Like, Jake Edinger is probably in the conversation.
Sorokin, Saros, Hellebuck.
Yeah.
We'll do a whole...
We'll get there.
We'll do a whole episode about that. But Brian, we'll also do a whole episode with our remaining green boys and then all of our red boys. We've been going for a bit. And we actually started late for those of you who are listening to the audio. So I think we'll call it here. But this has been a blast, Brian, talking through some of these guys. I love hearing your great deep dives. And yeah, we're gonna record another episode at some point. It's the off season of the NHL, but not the off season of the podcast. I've been having a lot of fun doing these shows with you, covering all the transactions. And now we're starting to look back at last season. We also have a really fun episode that was suggested by one of our patrons. Where we've already gotten suggestions for it of players who are like hitting like a threshold of like, what was it, like 400 games or 300 games? We had a good suggestion of like looking at players who are about to hit this like threshold where generally players tend to like have their breakouts. And we could look at projections there. So we've got a lot of fun planned for the next month. Once September comes, it's going to be the couple registration deadline. Then we're going to do all of our classic episodes, like looking at the Yahoo rankings and like talking to Dom Lucian. We haven't asked him yet, but he says yes every year. Talking about his projections. We'll do more goalies board. So then we're going to draft. Oh my God, I'm getting ahead of myself. But anyways, Brian, this has been a blast. Thanks everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Keeping Karlsson. If you did, we'd love a 5-star review. We actually still have our contest going. I think we still have a few left for our giveaway of a Dauber guide, not only the guide, like the whole ultimate pack. So if you leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever, and then send us a message letting us know you did that, we'll enter you in the draw for that. But you could also just do it to be nice. Like I mentioned at the start, we still have our Patreon and our Discord community is like a lot of fun, and we still have 1 month left in our summer promotion for only $1 a month, so you can come check it out, do some mock drafts, hang out, start asking your keeper questions, draft questions. We're having a good time. keepingkarlsson.com/patron. But I think that's enough from me, Brian, so why don't I throw it over to you as the outro music begins to play, and then you go ahead and read us the credits.
What did you just say? A lot.
I said a few
There's
things.
something I wanted to tag on to, but I can't remember.
The Discord, iTunes review.
Oh, the iTunes. Okay, yeah. Okay. And for the reviews, like, don't just give it us a 5-star if you don't mind. Like, you hit the 5 stars, that would be great. But like, if you write something that's also impactful, I think that helps, like the metrics or whatever.
Helps my ego.
Definitely helps the ego. Oh man,
but I'm gonna rank it. I'd rather have no comment and 5 stars than like 3 stars and a comment. Like, yes. 5 stars is number 1. Don't even show up if you're not giving 5 stars. 5 stars with a comment
is number 1.
Yeah, 5 stars with a comment is number 1.
5 stars is number 2.
Yeah,
and then otherwise just don't. Otherwise, send us a note. Like, let us, like, rate us. Like, we're reachable. Let us know how you're feeling.
If you actually have an idea of a way we could improve the show.
Yeah.
Well, Brian knows I'm like so easily manipulated. Like, you'll tell me,
so
like, I could get like 20 compliments
by
and
any
like, 1
listener.
negative by
not
any
by
listener.
Me.
Yeah. Well, not by you.
Not a co-host. I can't. Yeah.
Anyways, we're okay. Wait. So by the way, I'm sure as for the listeners, we haven't started the credit music yet because I don't want to have to loop that for like 20 minutes. So starting now, cue the outro music. Brian reads the credits.
You should just loop it you should make a looped version. So you don't have to do it every time.
It's not doing it. It's just I don't want the listeners to have to like have this song stuck in their head because they have to listen to it for so long. I'm worried about them. All right. Now we're going to cue the outro music. Read us the credit.
It's so catchy. It might be in their head anyway. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dauber Hockey and powered by our patrons, including Aaron, our super supporters, Aaron, Ivan, Andrea, Zach, Tom, Derek, David, Rob, Ricard, and our first ever Patty. Thank you. Thank you, Elon. You're doing all you can. And thank you, Shams, to keep the fantasy news rolling on gamedaytweets.com, which remains gamedaytweets.com. And hopefully there's it's been slow. I hope it picks up again in September.
Well, we'll see if the beat writers start tweeting lines.
There's a lot of unknowns for where this will be located, but I know wherever it is, you and Shams will find it and find a way to share it with us all, which we really appreciate. Logo art by BrandonWeeb.com. Outro music by Pat Roach. This episode was researched with help from Dauber Hockey, Frozen Tools, Dauber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, The Athletic, HockeyGoalies.org, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, and Elite Prospects. And shout out to Fantrax for hosting our mock drafts.
Yeah, Fantrax is awesome. Thanks, Brian. Great job. Thanks everyone again for listening, and we'll be back at you soon to talk about our remaining Green Boys and our Red Boys, the players who were worse in the second half than they were in the first half. What should we all do, Brian, while we eagerly anticipate and await this fun episode that we're going to record next?
Please keep doing all you can to make sure that fantasy hockey is for everyone.
Peace. All right.
How many shows you've ended? with that after.
I don't
Are
know why.
you editing and releasing tonight?
No, I don't think
Okay,
so. But first
great.
thing tomorrow, like, and I wake up at like 6.
Oh
So,
shoot. So I am
but it's
gonna
okay.
have
You
to
can
do
wait a
it.
little bit.
Well, no, because I'll be out in the morning for a while. So like I wouldn't get to it until at least the afternoon. I'll try and power through it tonight.
Okay, yeah, do your best if you can. But okay, thanks everyone for joining us live. See ya. I'm gonna end the stream now.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
And